Hola, buenas noches, boa noite. Hello, everyone. Welcome on this day when we celebrate women. Nice to see so many women here participating in this, and the men are just so very welcome as well. I'm Lily Carvalho, the Executive Director of VLACC, the Vancouver Latin American Cultural Center. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. I want to encourage all of you to read and understand the history of this land and the people who have taken care of it for thousands of years, and what it means for you to be here. There is a fascinating resource that I'm sharing in the chat. It's called Beyond 94. It's a website that monitors the progress on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls for reconciliation. VLACC is a nonprofit organization with the mandate of sharing a deeper understanding of Latin American arts and cultures. Our goal is to establish the first cultural center for Latin American arts in Canada, right here in Vancouver. If you still don't know about our organization, please visit our website. I'll add the link to the chat. It's also just by joining this event, you were added to our newsletter. So we are going to be receiving information about future reading groups and also other events. I would also like to acknowledge the support of the UBC Latin American Studies Department for the series. The professors of the department have been hosting this series, taking turns. Other programming funders are the City of Vancouver, the BC Arts Council, Canadian Heritage, Canada Council, and Metro Vancouver. Now, I would like to pass on to Catalina Parra, Cata, the coordinator of the series. Cata, please over to you to introduce Arturo. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. So tonight's format will be simple. Arturo will kick off the conversation and give us a little bit of background, then open the floor to questions and comments from the participants. Feel free to unmute your microphone and raise your hand, real or virtual, when you have something to say. I'll help and support moderating the conversation to give you all a chance to speak. This event is being recorded for our archives, and it will also be shared on VLACC's YouTube channel. So feel free to keep your camera off if you are camera shy. So I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Ramon Victoriano-Martínez, Arturo, Assistant Professor of Spanish at UBC. Arturo was born in the Dominican Republic in 1969, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Law at the Universidad Católica Santo Domingo. Class of 1994, he earned his PhD from the University of Toronto in the area of Hispanic and Latin American literatures in 2010. After graduation, he taught in the Department of Language Studies, University of Toronto, Mississauga, the Caribbean Studies Program, and the Latin American Studies Program, University of Toronto, from 2011 to 2019. His primary area of research are the literatures and cultures of the Hispanic Caribbean, with an emphasis on issues of race, gender, diaspora, and national belonging. Arturo, how timely is your research for this time in the world, sociopolitically speaking, for our country and the entire continent? And we're really happy to hear from you. So please help me welcome Arturo.
Well, thank you once again for having me here. It's a pleasure to participate in these events. I know we were all hoping to be in person downtown in one of the libraries. I think it was what I was told that these events were held before the war ended. So. Hopefully we'll get it back, and next time we can be all in one room and share in person. So, but very, very happy to be here. And yes, these are very, when I was a kid, younger, we used to have a saying, an apocryphal Chinese saying that may you live in interesting time. Well, nobody wants to live in interesting time. These are definitely interesting times. So I'm glad that we get to carve out this space for go to a different reality, right? And see different ways of saying and being in the world. So without further ado, and I'm glad to see so many people here. And so the stories that I chose today are two very different stories, and they're both from Dominican authors. So I think I might give you a little overview of the authors. First of all, because I assume that many of you are not familiar with them. So like a show of hands, how many of you have heard of any of these authors before? Nobody. Okay. That's
I believe we read René on
yes, we
last
read
time,
one from René before.
Yes.
Yes, I think last year we did that, right? Well, let's start with René del Risco Bermúdez, because it's in order of seniority, right? René del Risco is one of the principal voices from the 60s and 70s. René was born, I think, you can look it up in Wikipedia. René was born, I think, in 1937, and died really young in 1972. Died in a car accident in 72. So he was only 36 years old when he died. But by that time, he was already the leading voice of that generation of authors. He has published a very important and maybe the most important poetry book of the mid-60s, a book called a book of poems called El Viento Frío, the Cold Wind, that came right after the invasion of the United States in 1965. And René was against the dictatorship of Trujillo. He was in jail during the Trujillo dictatorship. And the Trujillo dictatorship lasted from 1930 to 1961. He participated in those fights against the regime. A very young man, was in prison and tortured. Then when the Americans invaded in 65, he fought against the Americans. And then when the regime of Joaquín Balaguer, who was the American-backed authoritarian regime that conducted basically a dirty war against the left, was installed, René was one of the poets, one of the main poets and narrators of that scene. René is also one of the fathers of Dominican advertisement. So he was the creator of slogans that are still around 40, 50 years later, are still around. He was one of the, because of his exile in Puerto Rico, he was exiled in Puerto Rico. He learned those modern techniques of advertisement and brought them to Dominican Republic, and founded one of the first advertisement agencies in Dominican Republic. So he was a copy editor and creator of jingles and slogans, a writer of songs and all that. So a very a kind of Renaissance man, right? And of course, then his tragic death, died in a car accident in the Malecon, which is the highway. It's not exactly a highway, but in that time it was more of a highway that runs along the sea in Santo Domingo. So René belongs to what we call the post-war generation, right? It's the guys that published their first books and come into the literary scene after the 1965. Ángela Hernández, recently, she was awarded the Dominican National Literature Award in, I think, last year, 2019 or 2019, 2020. She was awarded the National Literature Award. She's from the generation of the 80s. So she's literary speaking, she's come from the generation of the 80s. She was born in the 1950s. And she's very interesting because she is a science major. Right? She went to school to be, I think, a chemistry, biochemistry or something like that. So she's a science major that always have an inclination for literature, but when she gets to the university, to the public university, she ran into this workshop, this writing workshop, very famous named Cesar Vallejo workshop, and she starts writing, and she's a poet by her main activity as a writer is poetry, and I think you notice that in the short story, right? Her prose has a very poetic strain, right? The use of imagery, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Ángela Hernández belongs to the 80s. René del Risco is more of the 60s and 70s, and you can see the two different sensibilities there, right? There's also the fact that I wasn't thinking about the date because I think we sort of agree on the date later on when I selected these two stories, but it dovetails right today in the International Women's Day. Ángela Hernández is also a feminist, very active in the 80s and 90s in the organized feminism in Dominican Republic, right? So this is to give a little bit of background on the writers, right? And of course, they are part of canon, the Dominican Republic canon, that it's not very, very well known outside the island. So I always am grateful for these opportunities to introduce Dominican writers in translation. Those of you who read Spanish, who can read Spanish, well, you can find books by Ángela and René in Amazon or in any other places that you can get your books. So, but also you see the dates in the stories, right? The date of the publication. Summer of 2000, that was the last time Kalalu or any journal of importance had a number dedicated to Dominican literature. So these translations are 20 odd years, or maybe more. And in the case, so talking a little bit about the translators, Beth Wellington, the translator of René del Risco, is also the now widow, and translator of Norberto James Rawlins, also a poet, very important poet of the 60s, companion also in the struggle against the Americans, much younger than René. Norberto was born in 1945, and Beth was his wife and translator for years, and Beth has a dedicated translator of Dominican literature. Elizabeth Paravicini-Gebert, it's professor, I think she is in Florida State now, I can confirm later. and she runs the blog Repeating Island, a very important blog of Caribbean literature and art. So if you are interested in following what is happening and what new books and publications comes out, that's a very good place to be. Repeating Island. And I think, let me, if I can get to, maybe go to the website and I can put it in the chat. repeatingisland.com, and it's Elizabeth Paravecini, and basically it's the two of them that run that website, and you will find there the main publications of in the Caribbean, in all the languages. So they run a very efficient blog, and it's only 2 people basically, so it's an enormous amount of work. But she's also a working translator, and been translated Caribbean, Hispanic Caribbean literature for a very, very long time. So 2 things is the first of all, these are original works published in Spanish, so take into consideration that what you're reading is a translation, right? And there are certain nuances there that I think both translators did a really good job in putting forward. Which one do we like to start with the conversation? Because I think I've talking way too much for now. Anyone? So let me ask the question that I always ask to my students or whoever. Did we like the stories? Did we like one more than the other? I don't know.
I thought Opportunities was a great story.
Opportunities? The Opportunity? René?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, The Opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. So...
I also liked Opportunity. That was also my favorite out of the 2.
Oh, really? Okay, we got 2 votes for The Opportunity. So, anyone for Allotropes?
Phyllis has the hand up. I don't know if that is a vote for
Allotropes.
Yeah, Allotropes.
I like them
Allotropes.
both. I thought they were both really, really different. So I couldn't say I liked one more than the other because I found them both very different types of stories. So I like both of them. No
Yeah,
favorite.
Yeah.
definitely hard to compare.
Yeah.
They are very different, right?
Right.
So, what about those of you who have expressed it? So what exactly about the allotropes did you like?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Arturo.
I was just going to say that I like some of the phrases by Ángel Hernández in Allotropes. For example, when she's talking about why Felipe was imprisoned, it said that he suffered his imprisonment because of an outburst of survivalism, and that's a certain amount of ambiguity that I didn't exactly know what that meant, but it sounded really good, and. Or else the ambiguity to that where she says, I feared when Dinora's talking, I feared being rejected for my female condition. So I also wanted to know what she exactly meant by her female condition. Is it just her gender or something else? But what I really liked about this story is the two narrators. Although Dinora is more the main narrator, or the stronger voice and more aware, you know, Felipe Alfonso also has a nice voice in this story.
Yes, and also the in this particular story, and again, it's a matter. This is I don't want to get all technical here because this is not a literary analysis class or anything, but it's in the particular case of Allotropes, it's for me, it's always the title, right? It's always the title, which is a very unusual title. If you are even in Spanish, Allotropos, right? It's a very unusual title. And I remember when I first reading, it was like, what is this? It's a chemistry. It's a chemistry term, right? It's a chemistry term. And remember that I mentioned that Angela is a biochemistry major in a school, right? So immediately from the title, you can sort of guess where this is going, right? But it's not overt because it is not an everyday term, right? An allotrope is this condition of a body can have different manifestations, right? And it's kind of a double, but it's not exactly a double because, you know, the element, it has a lot of the characteristic of a certain body and is distributed, right? And I think, I don't know. There's a lot of elements in nature that have these characteristics. So immediately from the title, you'll guess that, oh, this is where we're going, right? And then you can see it physically in the story, right? These, like if we go in the first page, you have one type, normal, let's call it the normal type. I don't know which one is this one. I think it's Times New Roman, could be. And then you have these italics, right? So physically in the page, or in this case your screen, you have that distinctions, these two distinct voices going, but they are in the same body, right? And in the same page. So there's this paratextual, if you want to call it, characteristics of the story, right? So, and in the opportunity, the title is right there, right? The title is right there.
Yeah.
But what about, yes?
No, I just wanted to say that I really enjoy the story because I thought Felipe Alonso was complex human being, you know, a complex poet with that great imagination that he found beauty in the most mundane things. You know? And as a Chilean woman, I thought of our Nobel Prize Pablo Neruda when he wrote the odes. He's writing odes to things like the onion, water, air, whatever. So I thought there was kind of a similarity there. And and I really enjoy also the voice of Dinora, you know, because she's present there in a very particular way, and especially when they talk about Paul Eloy Faxas, what is his role there. So I thought it was complex and it was rich, and yes, I enjoy it very, very much.
And also the fact that and then this is where the internal part, the intra story is in, there's an actual poet in the story, and which is in page 989, where she founds the works of Paul Eloy Faxas, right? Is in the house of A. Blonda, right? And that is Massimo Avilés Blonda, one of the poets, main poets of the so-called Poesía Sorprendida of the 1940s. Massimo died really young. He was only 57 when he died. He died in 88. But he was a major figure in Dominican literature, right? Some sort of guru of the Dominican literature. His house was the center of this literary conclave, and every time a major international figure will come to Dominican Republic, they will visit Máximo Avilés Blonda and Vargas Llosa, they will go there, right? And this is also an internal reference from a young female poet to a forebear, right? And she was part of that young circle of poets around Máximo Avilés Blonda, right? And so there's that wink, right, to Dominican poetry, to Dominican literature, right? And the last name Faxas is the last name of one of the fighters against Trujillo in the 1959. So there's all those little things that point to Dominican history writ large, but also Dominican literary history, right, in Allotropes. And of course, this is a feminist, there's a feminist bent here, right? I think it was Arturo that mentioned that the female condition, was it, right? There's that reference to the female, what is it, if it's my female condition, right? And it's I think it has to do with the scarcity of women's writers in Dominican letters writ large. Angela is part of that boom, right? Angela is part of that boom of the 80s, 90s, and 2000. But before her, there are very few women's writers, right? I'm working with a period late 60s to late 70s. So after the revolution of 65 until the advent of democracy, full-fledged democracy in 78. And I'm doing a survey, and for every 10 guys that you find one woman, basically. And it's not only the ephemera, or what you call it, the everyday, the weeklies, the newspapers, the actual printing presses are not publishing women during this year. So in one count, I have it somewhere here, in one count, they publish around 500 something books, literary books, between poetry collections, essays, and novels. And I think only 8% were published by women during that time, so less than 10%. This is the environment in which Angela grew up and in which René del Risco was writing, right? So that reference to the female condition carries a lot of weight, right? when you put it in that context.
So do you think she's mocking it? There's some sarcasm there. But looking at
that's interesting, right? Because she's the commanding voice, right?
yeah.
Like if you look at it on the page, you say, well, you know, the female condition, but she's the commanding voice, right? She's the one that moves the story, right? And at the end, she's the one talking.
Yeah, but when she uses the word condition, it sort of carries like a temporariness and sort of like it's something that she fell into. She accidentally became a female, and it's something she's trying to work out of. So she's mocking it. That society looks at it as almost like a failure or a, you know.
Yes, right. And this idea of the, you know, the second wave feminism, right? Very Simone de Beauvoir, who had a lot of influence in Dominican Republic, by the way, right? The writing of Simone de Beauvoir, the second sets, and all that. You are not born a woman; you are made a woman, right? All that. Yes, I can. That's a good approach because, you know, let's remember that Angel Hernandez is also a feminist, practicing. Militant feminist during the 80s and 90s, right? So yes, there's certain sarcasm there. I can agree with that, right?
And also the voice.
Let me look it up.
Yeah, I was gonna say the voice of Felipe Alfonso is almost like an insecure solipsistic voice, right? So he thinks his life is being reproduced by other famous people, and he's always afraid that he's you know, copying something from someone. So he gives himself more credit than he really should have.
Right, there's that line at the beginning, his crisis of originality was most original, right?
Yeah.
Right, because there could be a meditation on the derivative quality of certain literature, right? We are not creators ex nihilo, right? But this idea of the influence, right? If we want to go very again technical here, this is what Harold Bloom will call the anxiety of influence, right? Every poet fears the poets, the big names that came before, and try to overcome that anxiety by working through, right? It's very psychoanalytical, it's very product of the 70s, right? But it's here you can use that lens to see here both in Felipe and in other, right? And remember the I think I see in the chat somebody put the definition of allotrope, right? It's that this double, that it's one, right? And again we come back to that theory of the double, the doppelganger, very common in the Southern Cone fantastic literature, right? Think of Cortázar, Borges, right? Who else? Rodrigo Fresan at some point, Ricardo Piglia does it, right? This theory of the double, that we have our double. And also every time I read this story, I think of another story by Cortázar, Julio Cortázar. It's called, I never know how to pronounce it, Ajolol. Is that, let me see if I can write it. I think it's Ajolol. I think it's Ajolol, it's pronounced. it's a short story by Cortázar. So if you haven't read it, it's available. I think if you read the Spanish, you can find there's a good, and if you like short stories, and if you're here, it's because you like short stories. There's a good website called Ciudad Seba, and it has a whole library of short stories. I put the link there. Ciudad Seba, it's run, it has been run by years and years. I think Ciudad Seba must be 10 years old, probably more, by a very important Puerto Rican writer, Luis Lopez Nieves, and then you can find his own work there. But for me, that's most of those short stories, especially the ones in translation, are difficult to get in print. So he has done this. I don't know how many copyright laws he must have been violated for the ones that are alive, but most of them are in public dominion. So I don't know about the Cortázar ones, and because Cortázar died 30 years ago, and so I don't know. But they are there, they are circulating, and I think Acholol is there. Oh, somebody put it there. There you go. Thank you. Acholol is there. So if you have time, you can read that. This is very. It's a story that always makes me think about this one, right? The fusion of both entities, right? And the other story that always I think about when reading this one is one by Mexican writer Elena Garro. La culpa, I think it's in that side too. La culpa es de los Tlacatelcas. The blame the Tlacatelcas. It will be the translation also.
Arturo, Margarita put a comment on the chat.
Yes, all the stories have been written, right? What is it? In narratology, you say that there are 36 situations, right? There are only 36 plots, right? And everything is a rewriting, and you know the journey. The hero comes home. The hero leaves home. The woman is in the castle, has to be rescued. The woman is rescued. The woman gives you the keys to escape, etc. So it's a very formalist approach, but yes, there's a recursive element in all these stories, right? And of course, when you start looking for connections, you start finding them, right? That's the thing, right? Yes, and in English, what is it that we say in English? That is not the tale, is the teller, right? Is how you tell a story. Yes, la culpa es de los Tlaxcaltecas. That's the Elena Garro stories, right? And of course, if you read Spanish, this is a longer one. If you read Spanish, it's a very interesting story because there's that fantastic element that we can see here, right? In Allotropes, is the element of possession also, right? And it's very subtle, right? You don't. I like the way Angela takes you to that final resolution, in which you as a reader say, "Oh, something's happening here," and she leaves you there, right? Again, that's the beauty of the short story, is that it carries that power at the end, right? She leaves you there. You realize that the shift has happened, right? Somebody mentioned that.
Arturo, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
So as I was reading the story, and now that the discussion has been going, because I still find like a lot of pieces of the story were very confusing to me, to be honest with you, like as I was going through it. And some of them, for example, like the character of, when you are mentioning all of these and the background helps me a lot to understand, like, okay, there's a lot of historical background. And so that makes it a lot easier to understand. But I still am puzzled by this character of Paul Eloy Faxas. Like, it's mentioned, like my first understanding was that he was a Mexican writer, and then he was getting kind of like obsessed with the fact that he was almost writing the same as this person, that almost like this person in a way he was kind of persecuted by him because all his creations were almost the same as his. Is that right? Did I get this right?
Yes, and there's also this idea of on one level you can read this as, and I don't want psychoanalyze Angela, but you can read this as a writer working through her anxieties, right? These are two writers. These two characters are two writers that are obsessed with a writer, right? So you have Dinora and Felipe Alfonso, right? Obsessed with this writer, right? But think about a very famous short story by Borges, Pierre Menard, author of Don Quixote, right? Where Pierre Menard tried to write Don Quixote, not a rewriting. He tries to write Don Quixote exactly as Cervantes wrote it, right? Which is that short story. That short story in particular has been cited over and over again as the beginning of the meditation on post-structuralism and the death of the author and all that. Because if you can rewrite Don Quixote using the exact words of Cervantes, is that plagiarism, right? Is Pierre Menard plagiarizing Cervantes when he writes Don Quixote? And if you go to the short story by Borges, you say, right, well, no. And Borges comes back to that idea in that definition of a map that is so comprehensive that it becomes the country, right? It's a map that goes over the territory until it becomes the country, right? So here you have this anxiety with Paul Eloy Faxas that starts taking the life of both. There's that part in page 1990, right? And if you look at the paragraph, the second paragraph, from a wooden box at the other end of the room, he takes out a piece of metal tubing. The blow spattered the glass outwards, leaving an ample opening with a sharp-edged border through which one could see the black plowed earth, the road with its brilliant curves, and the purple clouds of the dome floating above the puddles left by the rain showers. So very poetic, break the window, look at it. And then we go to the other voice, which I can assume is Felipe Alfonso. I raised Dinora's eyes. I would like to scrape her away entirely, right? A tear. I must annihilate her plagiarism, right? What is that butterfly doing leaving the dust on the wall? It doesn't fly. Butterflies fossilize in a matter of days, fly, the color annihilated in a few hours. A drop gels, let it dangle, the bell rings. Does it compel a sleep? Plagiarism? Does it command to dine? Plagiarism? Does it dictate exercise? Plagiarism. She smiled at me, assuring me that I had plagiarized a Mexican. Again, the anxiety of every writer. I have a writer friend that is very serious. He says, I only read long dead writers. So nobody will accuse me of plagiarizing nobody will sue me for plagiarism, right? So I only read dead writers.
Yeah.
So I don't have the influence of a live one.
I think Margarita wants to say something. Go, Margarita.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Catalina in the sense that I love the story, but for me it was a bit complex and read it twice because this character, Paul Eloy Faxas, he was a Mexican writer, but he lived like 100 years ago. So Felipe Alonso then really big problem for him was to be sure that he wasn't plagiarizing this this writer. That's why I thought the title Allotropes, it was so it was wonderfully written because it has so much to do with these two characters, because Paul Eloy is also his life was quite similar to Felipe Alonso because he was also in jail. He had a problem with the left or right hand, or he likes hydrogens, a specific flower.
Yeah.
So I thought the title was so proper for the dynamic of the story. What I got at the end of Dinora, the last page, for me, it was like her telling me that Paul Eloy lives in her heart. On her mind. Somehow, that's the way I interpret it. I mean, this, yeah.
Is that shift, right?
Yeah. So I don't know. She got so much into this situation of the two writers and their plagiarism problem there that in her heart and her mind, Paul Eloy lives there.
Well, that's the fantastic element, right? Where again, one of the main tropes in literature, especially in fantastic literature, or Gothic, if you want to call it, is the possession, right? The obsession with. We can find that in Poe. We find that in other Gothic writers, right? The obsession with the character, it becomes so much that overtakes, right, the life of the other one, right? So Angela operates under that also. She operates under that universe of the 80s, 70s and 80s. So as a writer, as a reader, she comes of age in the mid 60s, right, to the 80s, right, is the height of Borges, Cortázar, the boom. So she's very influenced by those writers, right? And she's not, even though she's a poet and she writes with a very poetic voice in here. And these two writers that I brought today are poets. René is not that, right? René's story is not that. The language is different, right? The language is different.
I just wanted to mention something, Arturo, if I may, with all this conversation and with what just Margarita said. I don't know, I just may throw something that I've just been thinking about, and this is kind of like my feminist perspective right now coming out on how I read, like now that I understand a little bit more, like I'm analyzing the story of Allotrope, I'm thinking of a couple of things. I find of what you were saying, like you mentioned a couple of things, like Poe, for example, describing a lot of the things in his writings regarding like obsession over things, or when Harold Bloom said the anxiety of the poet, when we talk about psychological literature, or like, for example, Ernesto Sábato in The Tunnel, and like when we talk about Nietzsche and all of that. But if we have a pattern here, they're all males. So I start to think about, are we talking about the psychological crisis of male writers, perhaps when they get to a point of their creative process where they might think, am I trying to, how am I going to prove that I'm different right now? Like, I don't know, this is like my perspective as a female, and the competition that we see between males to show. And I'm sorry, I want to like, also, I don't want to speak for males, right? I'm a woman. I don't live in the story of a man. But how is it to be in a world where a man has to always show that he is best, that he's doing the number one thing, that he's coming out? So I'm wondering the kind of anxiety that a male feels. I don't know if I ever seen any female writer writing about this, but I've seen a lot of male writers talking about this issue. And so when I see the story that she writes, it's very interesting because she gives the female perspective, almost like she's looking from the outside to this man struggling within himself, and she herself makes a story of it. So she's kind of like coming up with a thing that she's observing as a female poet, as a female writer. And she comes out with her own story as she looks at these two people, that is really one, struggling within themselves, and how she herself creates a story out of it and kind of brings the female perspective out of it.
Yeah, well, especially with Bloom, right? He recently died, I think. Bloom. It's a very psychoanalytic approach, right? This book was written in the early 70s, right? At the height of this school of psychoanalytic literary readings, right? By using psychoanalysis as the main tool. And we cannot forget that psychoanalysis is very male-oriented, even though the ones sustaining psychoanalysis still these days are women, right? Elizabeth Rudinesco and all that are actually right now the main defenders of psychoanalysis are women. But let's not forget that psychoanalysis is a very patriarchal oriented way of thinking, right? So yeah, that's a good that's a good insight, because now I want to think what women writers go through that, right? I think it's a different lens. I think you're right. I think it's a different lens to look at it, because I think about, for example, Toni Morrison, right? To talk about an Anglophone writer of enormous stature, right? She's writing of a different. Her anxieties are very different than Ralph Ellison, for example, to put another black male writer, right? Or James Baldwin, who she deeply admires, and she was one of the read the eulogy when James Baldwin died. But James Baldwin's anxieties are totally different than what she works on. So I think you got a point there, right? And in the sense that this female voice is from the outside looking in, and in fact, when that narrator voice goes into Felipe Alonso's mind, is that anxiety, right? The anxiety of plagiarism, which she doesn't have as being possessed, right? If you go to the end, she doesn't have that anxiety. It's not a problem for her, right? It's more of identification, right? That's a good one, right? But coming back to the language, what about the other one? Right? Because I read that, I hear that the language in Allotropes, it's difficult, it moves you. Sylvia, I see a hand.
Because I would like to compare both, because I think that Allotropes is actually an existential and complex story. And actually it's a bit disjointed, and for me doesn't have like a beginning and the end. It's like floating, all the time. And but in the other hand, like Opportunities is very easy, it's simple, It's a story that have a beginning and the end, conclusion. So there are two different worlds there, like no
Yes.
way to compare or anything, because
Yes.
it's two different things. So probably, as many of you say that you had to read twice, I read once only Allotropes, and I wanted to read again, but I didn't have time. But so that for me is like maybe it's too complex, like I don't know. I think that it's not articulate the
Yes.
whole thing,
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, I don't know, it's difficult to evaluate in a way.
Yes.
Something
It's
that
also-
people has to read, everybody has to read twice or more to understand and follow,
Yes.
So it's very interesting, and we can talk a lot about this, but I don't know.
It's also a matter of techniques, right? It's also a matter of techniques. It's not only a matter of language, it's a matter of techniques, right? And you're absolutely right. The opportunity is a more traditional story, right? In the sense that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? While the Allotropes, it has this technique of, even though it's very common, it's not very easy to follow, which is things start in the middle, right? What he calls in medias res, right? Things start in the middle. And think of the Iliad, for example, right? Seeing goddess, right? The wrath of Achilles. We are 10 years into the war, right? When the story starts. Allotropes start. I recall Felipe Alonso, right? It's not even like, who is Felipe Alonso and why are you recalling? What is happening here? I see a hand, Phyllis.
Yeah, I just, well, opportunities, it's much shorter. So it's, in that sense, simpler.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was very complex in many ways. And, especially when he says he sees the crowd and he would have been in that crowd a year ago. But now he's just going to apply for the job at the insurance company. And I just found it like, well, I don't know why. I don't know anything about him. And I found it pretty mysterious as well.
Yes, right. And again, the context here is important, right? This one was written in late 70s, late 60s, early 70s, right? And one of the themes of René's work is, and this is my take, I'm working on René's material now for my next project, and the common reading of René's work is that he's the poet of the disillusion of the middle class, nationalist, middle class, democratic, that fought against Trujillo, fought against the Americans in 65, and see the whole liberal project collapse. And he lived the first 6 years of Balaguer regimes. So he suffered the loss of comrades that were killed and jailed, right? And he is writing from outside the politics, right? He's already an advertisement man. He's removed from the political fight, and he's writing about this disillusion, right? This guy, the protagonist of the opportunity, we sense the shift, right? And we are told that a year before he was protesting. Now he's going to have a middle class bourgeois job. There's nothing more bourgeois than working in an insurance company. Think about it. Yes, I see a hand, Margarita.
Yeah.
And then Sylvia.
You know, I'm enjoying your talk so much, because when I read this story, I was kind of lost. For me, the protagonist doesn't have a name. To the reader, he feels distant. And then I didn't empathize with him, you know, like I did with the previous character, with Felipe Alonso. And then that you are explaining why this, what was the time where this writer wrote this, and the political, you know, ambience of the time, it really makes sense now. Now I feel for him, because right, he's he's disillusioned, of course, all political problems that he live in his country. So he's disillusioned with everything. So you know what? I'm just gonna take this job that is sure, and I'm gonna have a sure income, whatever, and that's it. So now I can empathize with him. So thank you for that.
Sylvia?
Yeah, no, that it's funny, you know, how each one interpret this. But when I read, I thought, okay, this is timeless. Is what we are living today. And that, for example, in Russia, anybody that protests is, or, you know, like torture and in prison, maybe for many years, just to protest. And this happened in many, many countries, that people can't protest if no, they are going to be beaten or whatever, you know, killed. We saw that last year in Colombia, in Chile, you know, that they were. So I was thinking, okay, this always happens. So it's like anybody, you know, can say, okay, I didn't work, and it's a survival thing. That most of the people take that route, because it's difficult. How many people go to protest is the minimum, you know? Even they say 1,000, and 1,000 is, you know, nothing compared with the people that say, oh my gosh, I better, you know, follow the normal stuff, work. And of course, it's funny that it's an insurance company, you know?
Yes.
It's the opposite. It's funny, you know, because
it is. And again, if we go to in the third paragraph, right? He was a man with his feet on the ground, according to this concept. At 8 o'clock in the morning, he got up, went to the bathroom, humming a few bars of a song. He came out refreshed, clean shaved, sat at the table, ate breakfast, and chose a suit from the closet. The most appropriate color was light gray. Not too serious, not too casual. The tie had to be stripped in accordance with the most recent dictates of good taste. Silk socks, of course, black shoes, shine and buff, and a touch of cologne to complete the look. Everything very correct, right? Just in that paragraph, you can feel and see the accommodation, right? The acceptance of the bourgeois middle class routine life, right? Trust me, as a guy that wear a suit every day, there's nothing more boring than a man in a suit, and that's the reason why I wear a suit. Like, it's a uniform, right? And a gray suit, right? Remember in North American culture, we have this very famous image, the man in the flannel gray suit, right? It's actually a novel and a movie, but this image that the guy in the gray suit is everyday life, right? They look the same, right? But it's the corporate man, right? But he's not. He's going to ask for the job, right? He has an interview, right? And at the end, there's that insistence on punctuality, right? Being governed by the clock, right? He got up at 8 o'clock and he gets there at 10, right? So everything happens in this space of 2 hours. This is another thing. This is a very, so technically speaking, this is a very controlled short story. Very concise, very precise. This is technically the writer here is always in control. There's no. It's a very economical, right? There's no wasted words or image. You don't move very far from the subject, right? And one thing is that you are walking with him. We are walking with him, right? On reaching the corner, he had to wait a moment at the curb until the last car in the line whizzed past. Then he could cross all right, but quickly. These and other things are what make people sweat in the city, right? So again, we are here, and this has to do with the internal history of Dominican literature. René is also the big narrator of the city life, of the modern city life, right? He brings the modernity into the Dominican literature, right? The cinemas, the neon lights, the cars, all these are subjects of his poetry and his short stories, right? It's in an unfinished novel that he left in his desk when he died. He returns to his province of origin, San Pedro de Macorís. He wasn't born in the capital, so he goes back to the rural, but he didn't finish that novel. All his narrations and poetry are urban, right? And here we are in the city. The man in the suit, the protests are in the city, and we have to assume that he's a very, like a young man, right? He felt when a huge poster with red letters, 2 flags of different colors, young men in notebooks, young women with large bundles, and noise. A great din that grew rhythmically as the crowd advanced. He felt a sudden and a strange joy that quickly turned into a sweet pang of fear, a brief jolt that made him tremble. A year ago, he definitely would have been among them. In fact, he would have been among the first, among those who march in the front line with their closed fists, eyes fixed straight ahead, roaring, "Get out, no, or death," right? The ellipsis, right? Look at it, the ellipsis. Get out, that get out address, again, this is Dominican history, that get out addressed to the American forces, right? Yankees go home, it was the thing, right? So get out, no, but then the ellipsis, or death, right? And in the story, in the original story, you will recognize that ellipsis, right? Fuera, no, o muerte, right? It's the famous slogan, right? Patria o muerte, fatherland or death, right? Is the famous slogan of the Cuban Revolution. Is the famous slogan. It becomes the slogan of the whole left, right? Patria o muerte venceremos, right? Is the whole slogan, right? Fatherland or death, we're gonna die, or we will win.
Exactly. I think what you're saying is applicable to all our Latin American countries that we have lived in this generation. Like you just said, patria o muerte, o venceremos. Yeah.
I thought this story was so clean. Like, I just loved the way it was written. I was kind of obsessed looking at like how he, in just very little sentences, with the use of such minimal amount of words, he could convey the context. Like, for example, what you were saying about like when he was crossing the street and he was like, this would make somebody sweat or something like that. Then that already he's describing how chaotic it is to just cross the street. Because, and then one thing, and the second thing is like you see these people marching forward, and then you see that's the office where you're going for an interview. So the choices he has to make in a context which is kind of chaotic and a little bit crazy to live in, right? You're in the midst of a post-war. So I find like kind of like post-war, because I thought how in the beginning, in a few sentences, he's already saying that they are no longer in a war, yet there is still riots happening. So I can only imagine how chaotic that would be. And at the same time, his life is so in order, like it's almost like living in two worlds. And so I thought the way he used the words and he used the sentences and he built the story in such a clean way, I really admire that. It was very, very concise, and it really gave me a picture of the context big time. And as Margarita was saying, it's so relatable to most of the countries in Latin America, really, and sadly to what I think is happening right now in Ukraine, if we really think of it.
And again, and it's the little, like you said, in the little sentences, right? A year ago, he definitely would have been among them, right? And then that little ellipsis there, get out, no, it indicates to the Dominican reader, or a reader that knows the Dominican history, that he's referring to 65. So a year ago is 1966, which is the year before, the year when he's writing actually his magnus opus, El Viento Frío, the cold one, which is in 66, Balaguer comes to power, and you know what's coming. You know that, to use a phrase from the popular culture of our time, in 1966, you knew winter is coming and it's gonna be ugly, right? You know it. And he processed that defeat through poetry and narration, and you know, his El Viento Frío is the poem itself, the cold wind. It's a T.S. Eliot influence poem, right? So you have these images of the city, right? And the middle class life, the comfort of the middle class life. But throughout the whole book, you feel that pang of guilt, of defeat, like we lost, right? And here, a year ago, he definitely would have been among them. And then that short sentence, only a year ago, like how much changes in 1 year, right? And think about the situation in which we are now. We are in the third year of a pandemic, and think about how much your life changed in 365 days from March to March, between 2020 and 2021, right? And here is a year removed from an invasion, and the soldiers are still there, right? We have to assume that the soldiers are still there because they are saying get out, right? So that's why the Americans leave in September 66, right? So we have to assume that the diegetic time here it's 66, and he's going to get a job, right? Because like Sylvia said, for the majority of the people, the war is over. And, you know, we have a government that we elected in elections. The elections were rigged by the Americans, but it doesn't matter. We have a government that was elected, and it's going to be in peace, and it's a civilian, and it's fine. So let's go back. And those guys lost. They are a bunch of communists, and, you know, off they are. Some were sent to exile, right? The defeated, the members of the armed forces that were in the defeated side were actually kept within the armed forces. That was part of the agreement with the American, but they were sent away as military attaches. They were sent to exile. The Americans that started giving permanent visas in '62 after the dictatorship, they start ramping up the issuing of permanent visas to make possible for leftist, social democrats, elements, youth to be removed from the country. So this is also happening here, right? Not only some people are getting into the middle class life, like this guy, other people are leaving, right? And you will find shorter stories that people are leaving because of the political situation. We can see that now, right? We are seeing 1 million people left Ukraine in 10 days, right? But we are seeing thousands of people marching in Moscow, in Kiev, marching everywhere against the occupants, right? And lucky for us, and sometimes for them, even though they are in a horrible situation, we have social media that I assume part of me wants to believe that it would have been much worse if we didn't have the videos and the, you know, the reports from the ground, even as horrific as it has been with the death toll of civilians and so on. A war without witness is way much. It's just horrible, right? And now we are living that, right? But in the aftermath, what happens, right? People has to go back to normal. And he goes here in the fourth paragraph, the second to last paragraph. And I was thinking that what Catalina said about how he, the narrator, puts you into that city, right? The crowd advanced in great strides. You could see the faces of some of them, the most expressive one, the most vehement ellipses, right? He turned his head automatically and observed the police patrol advancing behind his back. The paddy wagon parked beside the park. He looked ahead once again, 4 buildings and the sign of the second floor, right? That juxtaposition, if you look once, that's the old war. That's the past. He looks forward, right? And his future is Unión Americana de Seguros, right? An insurance company. A man in a gray suit, look at his past as a youth, rebellious, right? Marching, fists in the air, patria o muerte venceremos, right? The left is at the man in the future. It's going to that building, into a secure job, anodyne, repetitious work, right, in an insurance company. And he had at the last 2 sentences, this is very short. As soon as he entered the office, his eyes fell on the huge round clock. It was exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. Punctuality, right? He had arrived at the right time. He had the opportunity. Not an opportunity, right? The opportunity, right? He arrived at. So, and this is a 30-something-year-old man that is writing that story. Remember, René died, he was 36 when he died, 35, right? So this is a young man that writes that story too, right? It's not a middle-aged guy like me. No, this is a young man that is writing about practically a whole generation. So that's why I like this short story, and I like that. I'm glad that that you guys liked it, and that it wasn't as difficult to handle as Allotropes. So I'm glad. Yes.
Thank you, Arturo. Maybe if anybody still has some question, it's 7:22, so we are moving on to wrap up our meeting tonight.
I just had a quick question, unless anybody else would like to say something, because I've been talking too much.
All good stuff, Kata. Go for it.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
Come on.
So I was just like wondering, what would he feel like the protagonist? Because I find the author talks a lot about the context, right? And he's very exact in his use of the words and very precise, as you were saying before. But I was wondering, what does he feel? Like I'm sure he was passionate about the war. He won himself to the war. That was his life. His friends died, and all of this happened. And all of a sudden, he put this cold face because he has to, right? It's about survival. And he goes into this building as he hears the clicking of these guns. And that's my life now. It's 10 a.m. and I'm going to go for this interview. And I wonder, what does he feel? Because it makes me think of all of these unresolved feelings this person must have, like losing his friends, losing his country, losing his life, and now having to live a life he probably doesn't really want, but he has to live. But the author never talks about his feelings.
No, and this is the power of the short story, right? It ends at that moment, right? You can only infer what the character will say. And what Rebecca said, I think his obsession with punctuality, helping block what he's feeling, right? But that again, I always come back to that part of looking to the youth being repressed by the police. So the resistance continues, right? There are young people there that are resisting, but also he's looking forward. And this is what it's, if I continue this thinking, because I have to write a book about it, is that it's going to get me in trouble, is that on the surface level, you have to conclude that for René, when you go to The Opportunity and other stories, and a lot of that generation, and we are seeing it somewhat now, the solution is no longer collective. Like if you read the story again, the protagonist is alone by himself, and what he sees is the collective moving, right? And the solution, the opportunity, is for him, not for the collective, not for the people, right? And I think that was what happened. That was what happened with a lot of middle class, not committed to armed resistance or to the political struggle to organize parties. So let's call them everyday people. They participated. They were part of the crowd. But now that the project has been defeated, the solution is individual, right? And they move to these opportunities that capitalism because that's another reading, right? He's inserting himself into the capitalist renaissance after a war and a coup d'etat, right? And he goes to an insurance company, right? Which is a very capitalist institution, right? So one way to see that is that the narrator doesn't tell us, give us hints, right? The obsession with punctuality, that ambivalence of looking back 1 year ago I was one of them, right? So he's reflecting on what happened, but he chooses to the solution for him, the opportunity for him. It's not a opportunity, it's not the opportunity, it's not the opportunity, right? And he's punctual, right? He get up at 8, get ready, 9:45 he's crossing the street, right? And also throughout the story, you see that we are walking with him, right? Now he was on the street, cigarette pack in his shirt on the left, match butt on the right hand jacket pocket, fog of glasses firmly on the bridge of his nose, everything very correct. So that insistence of correctness, of punctual, of being on time and well groomed, right? Cologne, right? It's all the trappings of the middle class existence.
Right. Well, thank you, Arturo, for closing with in this great manner by kind of like, yeah, I just didn't notice these details, but it's true as well as Margarita was saying, like these details show a lot about what the character is going through. So
Yeah.
Thank you both. And Margarita and saying, she just said, I like how this story could be extrapolated to so many Latin American realities of our generation.
Yeah.
Thanks, Margarita, for that. Thank you, Arturo. I think we've reached the end of our reading session.
Oh my God.
Today.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And this was a great session. So thank you for sharing the stories and your insight. Thank you all
Thank
for
you.
participating. And over to Lily if you have anything else to add. You're muted, Lily.
Thanks, Arturo. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate it. So my comments are I just wanted to call attention for some events that we have coming up, especially for people who like literature. We are going to have poetry night. Catalina will be one of the readers, and that's going to be on March 21st. It's called Siete Poetas Continente, and it's going to be in Spanish. Also, just this coming Friday, on our Facebook page at 6 p.m., we are going to have a live concert with Stephanie Pedraza. And so pretty much what I would like is for you to go to our website and take a look at the programs for March. In March 31, we are going to have something that's like visual arts / literature, because it's going to be about visual artists publishing in Canada. And so Mexican artists, Canadian artists, visual artists publishing in Canada. And save the date for April 15th, when we are going to have our next in-person event, which is going to be a concert celebrating 200 years of Brazil independence. So it's going to be like 200 years of Brazilian music with some old songs from the late 19th century, plus all the way to bossa nova and contemporary music, with Fernanda Cunha, who is coming from Toronto for this concert. It's going to be at the Coach, and so that's something that I would really like, to see our community back together in person, and an opportunity for us to actually be in real life somewhere. So one last thing, it will be, we have been tweaking our events a little bit, and so I would really like if you could take 2 minutes to answer the survey that I put on the chat. Through Eventbrite, you're also going to get a link for this tomorrow. So if you don't feel like doing it today, you can do it tomorrow when you get the link. It's just a 2-minute thing, but help us keep shaping these programs in a way that works for everybody. So that's it for us tonight. Sylvia has something to say, I think.
I have a question. So all the activities that you just said are going to be in person? All
No,
of it?
the only one in person is going to be like our next event in person is going to be the Brazilian concert.
Oh, okay.
And that's going to be on April 15th. This Friday, we have a live concert on our Facebook page. On March 21st, we have this evening of poetry. That's going to be an event all in Spanish. And on I think it's the 30th or the 31st, we are going to have this artist book publishing by American, Canadian, and Mexican artists with a professor from VLACC and some local artists who are going to be talking about how visual artists can publish and what they have been doing with publishing. So I'm pretty happy and proud with the events that we're offering this spring. And we don't have the information up for the Brazilian concert, but save the date. That's actually Good Friday. It's on the Easter weekend, but we figured that it's going to be a Friday. I don't think that people are traveling all that much these days anymore. And anyway, it's going to be at the historical theater at the Coach, which is a lovely 200-seat theater. That if you don't know, I think it's an opportunity to see this space too. And Fernanda Cunha is fabulous. It's going to be her and this amazing guitar player, Brad Schwager. So I hope we can have you all there. Arturo, once more, thank you so much. Thank you, Kata, for helping us out.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.
Yeah, I'm
Bye-bye.
curious. All of you are in Vancouver?
We are who is in Vancouver? We are mostly in Vancouver.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where are you, Sylvia?
In Ottawa.
Oh, that's great that you can come to our events.
Thank you so
our
much.
live events.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
keep
Thank
warm.
you.
Keep warm. I know. I live in Ontario for 18 years, so I know what a winter was like.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you once more. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.